Anything can happen any moment. You lived with that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, day or night. You were always ready.
In September 1966, the 4th Infantry Division deploys to Vietnam. It will not be sent to the rice paddies of the Mekong Delta or the coastal plains where most American units are fighting. Instead, the Ivy Division is assigned to the Central Highlands, a region of triple canopy jungle, steep ridgelines, and sparse population that looks nothing like the rest of the war. The Highlands are where the Ho Chi Minh Trail feeds men and material into South Vietnam, and the 4th Infantry Division is there to cut the pipeline. Over the next 4 years, it will fight a grinding, largely invisible war in some of the most difficult terrain American soldiers encounter anywhere in Southeast Asia. The division arriving in Vietnam carries considerable institutional weight. Activated in 1917 at Camp Green, North Carolina, the 4th Infantry Division earned the nickname Ivy Division, a play on the Roman numeral 4. It stormed Utah Beach on D-Day and fought through the Hurtgen Forest, one of the costliest American engagements in Europe. By 1966, the division is stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, under the command of Major General Arthur S. Collins, Jr., a veteran of the Second World War and Korea. Collins understands the Highlands will demand something different from what other divisions are doing around Saigon. He is right, though the scale of the difference will take time to become clear. To understand why the 4th Infantry Division's war unfolds the way it does, you need to understand the strategy it is being asked to execute. By mid-1966, General William Westmoreland, the commander of Military Assistance Command Vietnam, has settled on a strategy of attrition. The idea is to use American superiority in firepower, mobility and logistics to kill North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fighters faster than Hanoi can replace them. Once the losses exceed North Vietnam's ability to sustain operations, its forces will reach what McVie calls the crossover point, and the insurgency will collapse. Whether this theory is sound remains one of the central debates of the war, but in 1966 it is American policy. Every division in Vietnam is employed accordingly. In the Central Highlands, the attrition strategy faces a particular problem. The North Vietnamese army does not need to hold territory here. NVA forces use the region as a transit zone and staging area, moving along infiltration routes that connect the trail network in Laos and Cambodia to the populated coast. NVA regiments mass in the Highlands, threaten an outpost or district capital to draw American forces into the jungle, and then withdraw across the border when the pressure gets too great. This is a challenge since political considerations constrain the available options. President Johnson rules out any ground operations into Laos or Cambodia, fearing Chinese intervention or Soviet escalation. The border sanctuaries are off-limits to American ground forces. The NVA exploits this with considerable skill. The 4th Infantry Division is therefore tasked with finding and engaging an enemy that chooses when and where to fight, operates in terrain that negates most American advantages, and can disappear into a neighboring country whenever it needs to. It is an asymmetry the division will never overcome. The method for executing Westmoreland's strategy is the search and destroy operation. In an ideal version, intelligence and reconnaissance identify an enemy formation. Helicopters quickly insert ground troops to pin the enemy in place. As contact draws in more enemy fighters, artillery and airstrikes are called in to eliminate them. The concept works on the assumption that American firepower is so overwhelming that any fixed engagement will end in the enemy's destruction. In the Highlands, this assumption is tested constantly. The dense canopy limits air support. The terrain prevents rapid maneuver, and the enemy rarely stays fixed long enough for the full weight of American firepower to arrive. Search and destroy in the Central Highlands often becomes search without the destroy. The division establishes its headquarters at Camp Inari, near the city of Pleiku. Pleiku is already a significant name in the war. An NVA attack on a U.S. advisory compound there in February 1965 helped trigger the sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam, known as Rolling Thunder. The area around Pleiku is contested, and the 4th Infantry Division immediately begins operations to secure its base area and interdict enemy movement along the Cambodian border. The division's 3 brigades fan out across the Highlands. The 1st Brigade under Colonel Judson Miller deploys to the border region west of Pleiku. The 2nd Brigade takes responsibility for Kon Tum Province to the north. The 3rd Brigade's situation is unusual. It has arrived in Vietnam ahead of the rest of the division as part of a personnel swap with the 25th Infantry Division, an arrangement in which soldiers nearing the end of their service are exchanged between the two divisions to avoid deploying short timers overseas. The 3rd Brigade initially operates in Tay Ninh Province near Saigon before eventually rejoining the division in the Highlands. The swap is administratively tidy but operationally disruptive. The division fights its first months in Vietnam without its full complement of brigades. The first major test comes during Operation Paul Revere 4, from October 1966 through January 1967, along the Cambodian border in Pleiku Province. American battalions push into the jungle along suspected infiltration routes, searching for NVA forces that intelligence believes are massing for an attack on Special Forces camps near the border. The terrain is extraordinarily difficult. Dense jungle reduces visibility to meters in places, and the steep ground of the Chupong Massif and the Ir Drang Valley, where the 1st Cavalry Division fought its famous battle a year earlier, channels movement along predictable routes. The NVA has already mapped these routes and registered them with mortar fire. Resupply depends entirely on helicopters, which are limited by weather, the scarcity of suitable landing zones, and increasingly effective NVA anti-aircraft fire. The pattern that emerges during Paul Revere 4 will repeat itself for the duration of the division's deployment. On November 11, 1966, elements of the 2nd Battalion, 8th Infantry walk into a prepared NVA ambush near the Say San River. The battalion takes significant casualties before artillery and airstrikes can be brought to bear. The NVA has chosen the site carefully, positioning forces where the jungle canopy limits air support and the terrain funnels the American unit into a narrow kill zone. NVA units initiate contact at close range, what the troops call hugging, to prevent the Americans from using their own firepower without hitting friendly positions. They break contact before reinforcements arrive. It is a simple tactic. It works consistently. The NVA in the Highlands is a well-equipped and professional force, not the lightly armed guerrilla formation that American planning sometimes assumes. Units operating in the border region carry AK-47 automatic rifles, RPD machine guns, and rocket-propelled grenades, giving them squad-level firepower that approaches American levels at close range. They also benefit from advantages no equipment can provide: intimate knowledge of the terrain, freedom to choose the timing of engagements, and base areas across the border where they can rest, train, and absorb replacements without interference. American intelligence estimates suggest NVA units operating in the Highlands typically initiate around 80% of engagements. They also become skilled at predicting American response times for artillery and air support and withdraw before it arrives. When they cannot withdraw, they close the distance so that American fire support threatens American positions as well. By 1968, friendly fire accounts for a significant and growing proportion of American casualties across Vietnam, and the Highlands are no exception. Operation Sam Houston follows from January through April 1967, covering much of the same ground. American intelligence identifies two experienced NVA regiments operating in the border area west of Pleiku, the 32nd and the 66th. The 66th had fought at the Ir Drang and has since been rebuilt and re-equipped. The 4th Infantry Division sends battalion-sized elements into the jungle to find and fix these formations using Westmoreland's search-and-destroy methodology. The results illustrate the fundamental tension in the attrition strategy. American units make contact, inflict casualties, and report body counts that satisfy MAC-V's statistical requirements. Kill ratios look favorable, but the NVA regiments are not destroyed. They absorb losses, withdraw across the border to refit in Cambodian base areas, and return weeks or months later at close to full strength. The crossover point remains a mathematical projection, not an operational reality. It is a pattern that will repeat itself throughout the war. The daily reality of service in the 4th Infantry Division is defined as much by the jungle as by the enemy. Infantry companies spend weeks on patrol, cutting through vegetation so thick that progress is sometimes measured in hundreds of meters per day. The climate in the Highlands is marginally cooler than the lowlands, but the monsoon season brings torrential rain that turns trails into streams, rots boots and uniforms, and grounds helicopter resupply for days at a time. Malaria is endemic despite prophylactic pills. Leeches, skin infections, foot rot and dysentery are so common they barely register in unit reports. With only a fraction of patrols making enemy contact, the constant threat of mines and booby traps becomes the dominant anxiety. The personnel system compounds the difficulty. Like all American units in Vietnam, the 4th Infantry Division operates on an individual replacement system rather than rotating complete units. Soldiers arrive as individuals, serve a 12-month tour, and leave. The result is that experience constantly drains out of combat units. A soldier who has spent months learning the terrain, the enemy's habits, and the 1,000 small judgments that keep a patrol alive goes home and is replaced by someone who must learn it all over again. Officer turnover is particularly damaging. Company commanders typically serve 6 months in command before rotating to a staff position. A policy designed to spread combat experience across the officer corps, but one that ensures no commander stays long enough to develop deep familiarity with his area of operations. The NVA faces no equivalent problem. Its units remain in place and their knowledge of the terrain accumulates rather than resets. The war the 4th Infantry Division fights lacks the drama that defines other units' experiences. There are no urban battles, no amphibious operations, no famous sieges. There is instead a relentless succession of patrols, ambushes, and brief violent contacts in terrain where the enemy holds most of the natural advantages. The Highlands produce no iconic images, they produce casualties. Operation Francis Marion runs from April through October 1967 and demonstrates both the division's persistence and the limits of what persistence can achieve. The division pushes fire support bases deeper into contested territory in Pleiku and Kontum provinces, extending American artillery coverage and allowing infantry patrols to react faster to intelligence reports. The concept is sound. The NVA adapts. They learn the range fans of the American guns, identify patrol patterns, and position ambushes accordingly. The fighting is heavy. On June 22, 1967, the 1st Battalion, 8th Infantry is hit by a reinforced NVA battalion near Kontum. The engagement lasts most of the day, with the Americans suffering over 30 casualties before the NVA withdraws. Less than a month later, another element of the division is ambushed in nearly identical circumstances less than 20 kilometers away. The NVA is reading the American playbook. The Americans have limited options for rewriting it because the terrain dictates movement, and movement along predictable axes invites ambush. Solving this problem would require either unrestricted access to the border sanctuaries or a fundamentally different operational concept. Neither is on offer. By January 1967, the division's commander is Major General William Pearse, who replaces Collins. Pearse will later gain prominence as the officer appointed to investigate the My Lai massacre. In the Highlands, he takes a more aggressive approach to border operations and significantly expands the use of long-range reconnaissance patrols. These LRP teams, typically 4 to 6 men inserted by helicopter deep into enemy-controlled jungle, operate for days at a time, gathering intelligence on NVA movements. They monitor trails, locate base camps, and call in airstrikes on targets of opportunity. The work is extraordinarily dangerous. A LRP team in contact with a superior force has few good options. Extraction depends on helicopters that may be hours away, and the NVA quickly learns to pursue these small teams with dedicated tracker units. LRP casualties are proportionally among the highest in the division, and the men who volunteer for the work know it. The LRP teams confirm what the division already suspects. The NVA is using the border sanctuaries as a revolving door, cycling units in and out of the Highlands on a schedule that American operations can disrupt but cannot break. Units identified and engaged in one operation reappear in the next, sometimes under different designations but with recognizable tactical signatures. The enemy is not being destroyed, it is being inconvenienced. The statistics from this period present a familiar problem. During its first 18 months in Vietnam, the 4th Infantry Division reports killing several thousand enemy fighters. American casualties are proportionally lower, and the kill ratios look good on paper. By MACV's metrics, the division is succeeding. The difficulty is that the metrics measure activity, not outcome. This is the same problem afflicting the entire war effort, but in the Highlands it is especially visible. Under Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, the Department of Defense has adopted quantitative management methods borrowed from the business world. Everything about the war is measured: bomb tonnage, helicopter sorties, ammunition expended, and above all, the body count. Since American forces are not capturing and holding territory in the traditional sense, the body count becomes the primary metric for assessing progress. Officers are judged on their numbers. The incentive to report high counts and the difficulty of verifying them in dense jungle where the enemy removes its dead produces figures that are unreliable at best and fabricated at worst. In the Highlands, the numbers look like progress. The NVA's ability to operate in the Central Highlands is not appreciably diminished. Enemy regiments continue to infiltrate, continue to threaten the border camps, continue to tie down American forces. The body count tells you how many died. It tells you nothing about how many more are on the way. The CIA, critical of MACV's statistical methods, estimates that enemy forces in South Vietnam are far larger than Westmoreland's command acknowledges. In the Highlands, where the border is porous and the sanctuaries are close, the supply of replacements is practically inexhaustible. Still, the figures do not tell the whole story. In November 1967, the fighting around Dak Tu brings some of the war's most intense Highland combat to the 4th Infantry Division's area. The division operates alongside the 173rd Airborne Brigade as NVA forces mass near the Special Forces camp. The 3rd Battalion, 12th Infantry fights a series of costly engagements south of Dak Tu, disrupting what intelligence assesses as a planned assault on the camp itself. The division's artillery batteries fire thousands of rounds during the Dak Tu fighting, and the logistical challenge of keeping them supplied by helicopter through the monsoon tests the entire support structure. Operation MacArthur, which encompasses the Dak Tu period and runs from October 1967 through January 1969, becomes the longest single operation the division conducts. The Tet Offensive of January 1968 hits the Highlands differently from the cities along the coast. Here, it takes the form of coordinated attacks on Kontum, Pleiku, and several border camps. The NVA's 24th Regiment assaults Kontum city, penetrating the urban area before elements of the 4th Infantry Division and Arven forces counterattack. The fighting in and around Kontum lasts several days. American artillery and tactical air support pound NVA positions in the city and its approaches, and the attacking regiment suffers heavy casualties before withdrawing. At the same time, the Ben Het Special Forces camp and the Dak Tu area come under renewed pressure from NVA forces that have regrouped in Cambodia. The division is stretched across a vast area, responding to multiple coordinated threats separated by distances that strain its ability to concentrate forces. At one point during the offensive, virtually every infantry battalion in the division is committed to a separate engagement. In a narrow tactical sense, Tet in the Highlands is exactly the engagement the attrition strategy is designed to produce. The NVA comes out of the jungle in large formations and attacks fixed positions where American firepower can be brought to bear decisively. NVA losses are severe. None of the major objectives in the Highlands are held for more than a few days. American and ARVN forces defend every position successfully, but Tet's significance is political, not military. The spectacle of coordinated enemy attacks across the entire country, coming after months of official optimism about the war's progress, shatters public confidence in the United States. Westmoreland's assurances that the end was coming into view are now a liability. The collapse of domestic support will reshape the entire war, including for divisions that, by the available measures, had performed well in their sectors. The 4th Infantry Division's tactical success during Tet makes no difference to the political outcome. This is not an irony the soldiers in the Highlands have time to appreciate. After Tet, the war in the Highlands shifts. The NVA moves towards small unit operations, rocket attacks, and sapper raids, pulling back from the large conventional engagements of the previous 2 years. The 4th Infantry Division adapts, expanding its fire support base network and increasing the tempo of small unit patrols. This, though, will prove harder than anticipated. The contacts are smaller but more frequent and less predictable. Mines and booby traps account for a growing share of American casualties, a trend especially acute in terrain that channels movement onto predictable trails. A company commander can do everything right and still lose men to a command-detonated mine on a trail his unit used safely the previous day. The randomness corrodes morale in ways that conventional combat does not. The fire support-based system the division relies on during this period deserves attention because it illustrates both American ingenuity and its limits in the highland environment. These bases, carved into hilltops and ridgelines, house artillery batteries that extend American reach into the surrounding jungle. Building one is itself a major operation. Engineers clear landing zones, construct defensive positions, and establish ammunition storage, all while exposed to enemy observation and harassing fire. Once operational, a fire support base becomes a fixed target. The NVA develops increasingly sophisticated techniques for attacking them, including coordinated mortar and rocket bombardments, followed by sapper assaults through the perimeter wire. Defending these bases consumes manpower and attention that might otherwise go to offensive operations. But the alternative, operating without artillery coverage, is worse. Through 1969 and into 1970, the strategic ground shifts beneath the division. President Nixon's Vietnamization policy aims to transfer combat responsibility to the South Vietnamese military while American forces draw down. For the 4th Infantry Division, this means working more closely with ARVN forces in the Highlands, particularly the 22nd and 23rd ARVN divisions. The performance of these units is uneven, a fact that American advisors report with a candor that does not always survive the journey up the chain of command. Some ARVN battalions fight effectively. Others are hampered by poor leadership, political interference in the officer corps, and logistical systems that cannot match the demands of Highland operations. The reality is not so clear-cut. The Cambodian incursion of May 1970, when Nixon authorizes American and South Vietnamese forces to cross into Cambodia to attack NVA base areas, briefly changes the dynamic in the Highlands. The 4th Infantry Division does not participate directly in the cross-border operations, but the disruption of Cambodian sanctuaries temporarily reduces NVA pressure in its area. The relief is short-lived. The political backlash against the Cambodian operation accelerates the American withdrawal timetable, and within months the NVA is rebuilding its base areas. The border sanctuaries that had constrained the 4th Infantry Division for 4 years prove as difficult to eliminate permanently as the enemy units that used them. Simultaneously, the division contends with the internal strains afflicting the entire American military. Drug use, racial tension, and declining morale are present in the Highlands as in every other theater. Many incoming replacements are draftees with less training and motivation than the volunteers who deployed in 1966. Officers and NCOs from the earlier rotations note a perceptible decline in unit cohesion. Fragging incidents occur. The isolation of the Highlands, where small units operate far from major installations, makes these problems harder to manage and harder to ignore. There is also a dimension of the war in the Highlands that receives less attention than the combat operations. The Montagnard peoples, indigenous tribal groups who have inhabited the Central Highlands for centuries, are caught between the warring sides. American Special Forces have been working with the Montagnards since the early 1960s, recruiting them into the Civilian Irregular Defense Group program and relying on their knowledge of the terrain. The relationship is complicated by the South Vietnamese government's hostility toward the tribes. The 4th Infantry Division's civic action programs attempt to provide security and development assistance to Montagnard communities, but these efforts are undercut by combat operations and by Saigon's unwillingness to treat the Montagnards as full citizens. The Montagnards' war is not the same as America's war, and no amount of goodwill at the division level can bridge a gap that exists at the level of national policy. The 4th Infantry Division begins withdrawing from Vietnam in late 1970, handing its area of operations to ARVN forces. The division's colors returned to the United States in December 1970 after more than 4 years in the Central Highlands. The cost is substantial. The division suffers approximately 2,500 killed in action during its deployment, with many thousands more wounded. These figures represent a sustained rate of attrition that is sometimes overlooked because the Highlands never produce a single iconic battle on the scale of the Ia Drang Wei or Khe San. The 4th Infantry Division's war is cumulative rather than climactic, a long accumulation of contacts and casualties in difficult terrain against an enemy that cannot be decisively defeated within the constraints American commanders are required to observe. The aftermath in the Highlands is telling. Within 2 years of the 4th Infantry Division's departure, the NVA launches a major conventional offensive into the Central Highlands as part of the 1972 Easter Offensive. Kontum, the city the division had defended during Tet, comes under direct assault. ARVN forces hold it, but only with massive American air support. By 1975, when the final North Vietnamese offensive sweeps through South Vietnam, the Highlands fall quickly. The infiltration corridors the 4th Infantry Division spent 4 years contesting become the avenues of advance for the NVA divisions that end the war. It is a conclusion that raises uncomfortable questions about whether interdiction without closure was ever a viable strategy. What the division accomplishes is real, if resistant to clean measurement. Its presence forces the NVA to commit substantial resources to the border region, forces that might otherwise be directed at the populated coast. The division disrupts infiltration routes, destroys supply caches, and imposes costs on enemy operations that are genuine even if they fall short of decisive. The Special Forces camps along the border survive in part because the 4th Infantry Division can reinforce them. The infiltration corridors are never sealed, but they are never uncontested, and that contest costs the NVA men and materiel it cannot easily replace. Whether those results justify the price is a question the division's own records do not attempt to answer, and the answer depends on assumptions about the war's purpose that remain disputed. The men who serve with the 4th Infantry Division come home to the same reception that greets most returning veterans: indifference or hostility. The Highlands are not a story that lends itself to simple retelling. There is no single dramatic arc, no flag raised on a summit, no city liberated. There is the daily reality of patrolling through jungle that seems determined to swallow you, fighting an enemy you rarely see until the shooting starts, and doing it again the next day because the orders say to, and because the men beside you are doing it too. The war in the Central Highlands is the American war in Vietnam at its most characteristic, an expensive, inconclusive contest, fought with considerable courage on difficult ground, in pursuit of objectives that are, by the end, no longer entirely clear to the people ordering it.